Okay, thank you for watching us. This is our presentation.
We chose to focus on Mexican birds because that has been the primary focus of our ethnobiological research for many decades and because we are avid birders. Also, Mexico is exceptionally diverse. Biologically, with 1,100 bird species. Furthermore, birds are like the proverbial canary in the coal mine, conspicuous, ubiquitous, and charismatic. The basic strategy of our analysis, however, may be applied most anywhere and to most any type of organism.
Mexico is also exceptionally diverse culturally, as judged by the 364 languages in 11 linguistic families spoken in Mexican indigenous communities. The ethno-ornithological data here presented includes 10 indigenous languages. Hunn's engagement dates to his dissertation research in Tenejapa, Chiapas in 1971, with subsequent research with the Zapotec community in Oaxaca, beginning in 1995. Alcantara visited Hunn in 1997 in San Juan Mixtepec, invited by their mutual friend and colleague Donato Acuca Vázquez. Alcantara completed her doctorate with Professor Roy Ellen at the University of Kent, Canterbury, UK in 2011, based on a comparison of Zapotec and Huicatec communities in northern Oaxaca. Alcantara initiated this project to highlight the indigenous contribution to biodiversity conservation through their stewardship and traditional territories. We propose a collaborative effort to archive the indigenous knowledge of birds in as many Mexican indigenous communities as possible, to be made available to the public, with the permission of local authorities. Two such archives are under construction, the IWA, based at Oxford University, and that of DEMCA, at the Smithsonian. eBird is a useful resource for getting local bird lists, supplementing the detailed range maps in Howell and Webb's Comprehensive Bird Guide. The Mexican census at INEGI can provide up-to-date information on local communities.
Each community should be defined by central GPS coordinates, extent of territory, current population, language, and subsistence mode. An inventory of bird species that regularly occur within the communal territory is compiled from field observations or by consulting range maps. This inventory establishes the universe of local avian species diversity from the professional ornithological perspective. The local indigenous inventory is defined by the named terminal taxa in the indigenous language, or if indigenous names are not known, then Spanish equivalents. It is important to distinguish names that refer to single Linnaean species from names that are underdifferentiated, that is, those that refer to two or more species, such as hummingbirds, flycatchers, wood warblers, and sparrows, which are often lumped together. The ratio of local named birds to the Linnaean inventory is what Hunn has called the scientific species recognition ratio, or SSRR. An analysis of the descriptive force of each name adds texture to our appreciation of the cultural value of each named bird. Many bird names are onomatopoeic, demonstrating close attention to vocalizations, while others describe distinctive morphological, behavioral, and ecological features. Some birds may be appreciated for one cultural value, others will have multiple cultural contributions. Cultural value is defined, first of all, by naming, then in addition, by a variety of cultural potentialities. The studies archived to date vary in emphasis depending on the research goals of the various ethno-ornithological projects. Some emphasize naming patterns, others emphasize symbolic values or economic values. The contribution of Mexico's indigenous people to the conservation of those birds, judged by conservation biologists to be of special concern, as detailed in various red lists of threatened or endangered species, is substantial, as proven by the number of such species known to occur within the communal territories of Mexico's many indigenous communities. It is helpful to visualize how strictly biological criteria for calculating the value of a species for biodiversity conservation, might compare with cultural indices of a bird's value. From the perspective of an indigenous community, we first limit our consideration to species known to occur within the life space of that community, the local avian universe. Biodiversity measures tend to highlight species with limited ranges or declining populations. Such considerations are rarely relevant for the citizens of an indigenous community, for whom the most valued species, and thus those most likely to be named, are often the larger and more abundant local species, or those with striking morphological or behavioral features. Rare species, highly specialized species, and migratory species are typically discounted or ignored by local people. Small size also counts against cultural recognition. Thus, the overlap of biological and cultural value is typically limited. Recognizing biocultural value is thus additive. To date, we have more or less comprehensive ethno-ornithological data from 10 communities across Mexico, as shown here. These 10 communities represent a variety of indigenous language families and a range of conservation of those languages in the face of Spanish. Most depend primarily on subsistence agriculture, with hunting and animal husbandry secondary. The three northernmost communities rely more heavily on hunting and gathering, with the combcock or seri the classic example. Habitats range from tropical and temperate woodlands to coasts and deserts, and range from sea level to above 2,500 meters. These communities typically are home to some 200 bird species of regular occurrence, and they name the equivalent of approximately 50% of those species, either specifically or more generally. Communal territories vary from 50 square kilometers to less often 5,000 square kilometers, as in the case of the Pima Bajo and the combcock or seri. Thus, collectively, these 10 indigenous communities encompass 769 species of birds, nearly 70% of Mexico's avifauna, within much less than 1% of the national territory.
Our ethno-ornithological data may be summarized in a matrix of indigenous communities by bird species by biocultural values. This is a work in progress. We ran a correspondence analysis for the bird species recorded in 7 communities with respect to cultural values and biological trait. The first 2 components accounted for 83% of the variation. Thus, there is a strong relation between bird species inventories and biocultural variables. In a plot of this data, 2 main groupings are evident, highlighted by superimposed ellipses. The upper ellipse groups Sierra Norte Zapotec and Cuicatec with respect to immaterial uses and ecological values. The lower ellipse groups Quilihuas, Tlahuicas, and Nahuas with respect to endemism, biological trait, nomenclatural recognition, and material uses. Birds may be valued in various ways. Curassows are hunted for meat in San Miguel Tiltepec, and their bones and feathers are valued materials. Some are named in exceptional detail, as are the robins in Tenejapa, or feared for their auguries such as orioles. Roadrunners are judged to have special powers in several communities. Species are honored in indigenous creation stories, as the yellow-billed cacique for the Yucatec Maya. The large white colorized swift is ambushed in flight in the Namesac paraje of Majosic, which means heat swifts, in Tenejapa Tzeltal. However, we are skeptical of the value of identifying specific birds as cultural keystone, by analogy with ecological keystone species. Rather, birds should be appreciated for their diverse supporting roles in motivating intense loyalty to the land in indigenous communities. Hummingbirds are appreciated for the brilliant plumage in several indigenous communities, but may also be used as medicine. The Pima Bajo ascribe extraordinary power to the turkey vulture and the golden eagle while the Comcac of the Seri-Sonoran coast of the Gulf of California consider the brant a sacred bird, as it arrives from its Arctic nesting grounds in the late fall, which coincides with the onset of welcome winter weather in this hot desert environment. The Comcac also have composed many songs celebrating local birds, as for example, the Gambel's quail. In Quetzapotitla, Veracruz, the rare local endemic Summicrust green is considered spiritually powerful. We believe that indigenous Mexican communities conserve bird life within their indigenous territories not for the sake of biodiversity per se, but for the sake of their own present and future livelihood and identity. We believe that indigenous territories should be valued as nature preserves on a par with those parks and preserves that have been formally set aside for biodiversity conservation. Indigenous communities, by virtue of their millennial occupation of local landscapes, clearly appreciate the diverse biota with which they share the land. Governments and NGOs should fully support such communities in their traditional stewardship of these ancestral lands. Here is some bibliography, and thank you very much.